The Callisto Protocol is not Dead Space. This sentence crossed our minds several times while we were completing the campaign of the new sci-fi survival horror directed by Glenn Schofield, the first work of his striking distance studio, but for reasons that have nothing to do with pure and simple nostalgia. It's not Dead Space in the sense that it doesn't reach those heights. It fails to build the tension and the fear equally. Let me be clear, he tries in every way to travel that same route, to terrify us as only the necromorph, than their shadows projected on the walls of the USG Ishimura knew how to do. But in most cases he fails. On the one hand, because the design of the mutants who set fire to Black Iron's prison is not as scary as we hope. On the other, because the fear of these creatures is substantially diffused by the need to fight them hand to hand, from a distance close up. After that, there are clear shortcomings on the management front. The shrill cry that tears apart the silence as we explore a dark corridor and makes our buttocks contract extremely strongly. The elusive shadow that heralds an even more gruesome creature to be faced shortly thereafter. The clear feeling of being defenseless because there are few shots in the barrel, and you have to make them enough. These are all things that the game brings into play with little conviction, perhaps fearing a direct confrontation, which however was obvious and inevitable. Glenn Schofield's new title isn't Dead Space, we said, but then what is it? We tell you about it in our review of the Callisto Protocol, characterized by a respectable cast of actors. Above all, Josh Lennox Duhamel, Karen Kimiko Fukuhara, and Sam Deacon Whitwer. The story of the Callisto Protocol tells the adventures of a space courier, Jacob Lee, who during his latest delivery is attacked by a terrorist cell led by Danny Nakamura and ends up crashing the ship on Callisto's surface, where he and the woman are unceremoniously taken to the Black Iron prison. The first minutes highlight the cinematic cut of the game through sequences that act as a simple tutorial with respect to the character's movement system, after which the narration accelerates by showing us the painful system to which all the inmates of the structure are subjected, including Jacob, and what is needed to Schofield for bringing his idea of an organic and minimal interface back into play. Prisoners have a health indicator on the back of their neck, exactly like in Dead Space. However, there is not even time to get an idea of what life will be like behind bars of the ruthless Space Security Institute. When he wakes up, Jacob discovers that the prison is in revolt. Several structures have been set on fire, and he himself manages to get out of his cell without too many problems to then meet Elias, a man who has spent half his life in Black Iron and knows this place like the back of his hand. He will help him escape if he offers to pilot the ship that will bring them to safety. It is the beginning of an improvised collaboration which, thanks to the emergency situation, quickly transforms into a solid friendship in which Danny, the woman who caused the crash of Jacob's ship, also somehow falls, in which the latter she absolutely fails to see her as a potential ally. Too bad that everything that happens around them seems to intimidate them to join forces and try to survive by helping each other. The chaos in which the Black Iron prison has plunged has in fact a precise cause. A sort of infection has spread among the prisoners which has transformed them into ferocious mutants, creatures endowed with superhuman strength and resistance, and which are only in the first stage of an evolution that will lead them to become even more monstrous and even more dangerous, as we will be able to find out during the campaign of the Callisto Protocol, the duration of which ranges from 12 to 15 hours, depending on how thoroughly the map is explored. The story is engaging. The writing of the characters is good, even though it often falls among the most classic stereotypes of action cinema. But the sudden development of their relationships is inevitably hurried and unconvincing, a lack that the screenplay itself could have filled, dedicating to these aspects a greater playing time. Certainly some choices and a basic banality are perplexing, which certainly does not elevate the game's script above the average. We mentioned at the beginning of the Callisto Protocol's combat system, which on the one hand introduces the novelty of hand-to-hand combat, particularly relevant in the first half of the campaign, and then becoming less central with the arrival of relatively abundant firearms and ammunition. On the other, precisely because of this approach, he ends up exercising the fear of the mutants that crowd the scenarios, even the most monstrous and repulsive ones. If in fact in the majority of third-person survival horror, from the aforementioned Dead Space to Resident Evil, there is always the imperative to keep your distance to prevent the monster on duty from grabbing and biting us, causing us serious damage. In the title of the debut of Striking Distance Studio basically does not have this fear. On the contrary, often staying away can expose us to certain attacks, and therefore we tend to seek contact with the opponent, dodging his blows by moving the stick left and right or parrying by pulling him back, then counterattack with a combo or a single heavy attack. In the end, it is a compromise, the one found by the developers, who have traded fear in exchange for a surprisingly effective combat system in the rendering of impact, capable of communicating very well the blows that Jacob inflicts with his electric baton, in particular on PS5 thanks to the adaptive triggers and haptic feedback guaranteed by the DualSense controller. In short, in the Callisto protocol you beat yourself up, which is a real pleasure. There is so much body in those shovels that you almost want to go to the fight always and in any case. The novelty of melee attacks as the main option is supported by the capabilities of the GRP glove, a device that the protagonist of the adventure steals from the corpse of one of the prison guards, and which allows in practice to obtain an effect very similar to the Dead's kinetic module space, therefore attracting objects and throwing them violently against the mutants, or attracting the mutants themselves and throwing them away, perhaps to hang them against the spikes that decorate some of the walls for an instant kill. Then there are the firearms we were talking about earlier, which in the first few hours play an exclusively supportive role compared to the combos with the electric baton, also due to the severely limited ammunition, however allowing us to quickly hit the weak points of a dazed opponent. Going forward, however, not only do the offensive tools increase, but also the bullets, which in practice are the only sensible way to take down the bosses, capable of killing us with a single blow. Also in this case the comparison with Dead Space is inevitable. The arsenal is classical in style. We will not find lasers that cut limbs or devices that launch darts, but more or less powerful guns, a shotgun and a machine gun. Nothing to say about gunplay, as well as for melee attacks. In the Callisto protocol, shooting also returns excellent sensations. So does the synthesis found by Schofield work perfectly. Not really, and here we need to talk about perspectives. In fact, it happens that the close combat system falters in the presence of several opponents at the same time, given that the possibility of dodging blows only works when applied to a single enemy, and therefore happens to remain at the mercy of other mutants or perhaps a boss, who as said can kill us instantly, a situation that is repeated throughout the campaign and which is very frustrating. We were talking about the prospects. If we consider the Callisto protocol an action game, then these shortcomings would be serious. However, since this is a survival horror, the difficulties in crowded contexts appear completely plausible and sensible, as well as the inevitable groping progress of the more complicated sequences, which pushes one to invent some kind of tactic to be able to complete the fight and continue, already knowing from previous attempts how many and which enemies we will find waiting for us. You know, the tank-style movements of the classic episodes of Resident Evil. Here we find an evolution of that concept, the same one we've seen in Capcom's remakes, but also applied to other elements beyond simple mobility. Jacob, for example, cannot use an injector to restore health in the middle of a fight, just as it is slow and cumbersome to change weapons. So much so that even calculating the times of these maneuvers ends up being part of the strategic approach we mentioned a little later does. Unfortunately, these assessments, which try to frame some of the limitations of the game in the context of the genre to which it belongs, which as we know uses woodiness in a functional way to a feeling of relative impotence, collide with an approach to stealth eliminations that turns out to be simplistic and trivial, especially when we find ourselves in scenarios full of creatures similar to clickers, unable to see but with developed hearing, and we proceed crouched to then stab the monsters in the back. The killing takes place between lamentations, but no other creatures it feels them, and the tolerances in terms of distance are also quite high. The enemies that we will face in the Callisto protocol, as mentioned, do not boast the iconic and creepy design of the necromorph, while also presenting an evolution on the monstrosity front as we progress through the campaign. Unfortunately, many of them behave in the same way, even after having undergone a mutation that starts when tentacles come out of their chests. And fighting them will involve the same dynamics as always between dodging, combos, and a possible use of firearms. There are exceptions, such as quadrupedal mutants that become invisible, crawling boomers, spitters, and bosses, but they are all the same, too bad. A few words therefore for the upgrade system, which can be accessed via devices that function as very fast 3D printers, as well as terminals for the sale of objects that have an economic value in which we can exchange for credits to spend precisely on upgrades of the truncheon, electricity, glove, and firearms, as well as possibly for the purchase of ammunition and syringes for restoring health. However, the inventory has a limited capacity, and in some cases it will happen that you have to give up something. The Callisto protocol does not try the open world path, remaining in the wake of a linear and traditional single-player progression. From this point of view, the author's approach was perhaps too cautious and renunciatory, and so it was decided to liven up the exploratory phase by introducing alternative routes that somehow offered an extra challenge and perhaps some rewards to the player. However, the game does not have a map to consult, nor does it provide indications on which path to follow, as instead happened in the multi-quoted Dead Space. And so it is not possible to understand which is the door that opens onto the main road and which is the secondary, if not in the presence of writings or signs. The real risk is to immediately hit the right path and miss the optional exploration, which however does not shine in terms of design or variety, always presenting a sort of tour that takes us back to the starting point. This phenomenon occurs especially among the narrow spaces of the Black Iron prison, with a further difficulty deriving from the fact that the corridors are very similar, and therefore it happens that you do not immediately understand where you are coming from and where you are going, because maybe in the meantime we got involved in a fight that made us lose the references we had. The puzzles are also limited to the exchange of fuses and the activation of some switches, without tickling our brains too much. Fortunately, the prison isn't the only location we'll be dealing with during the campaign. And while we don't want to anticipate anything, we can say that on this front, the experience of the Callisto protocol seemed solid and complete without innovating or overdoing it, capable of alternating closed and open spaces, abandoned colonies, and truly suggestive views, children also, and above all of a prestigious technical sector. Too bad that at the moment it is not possible to go back to it in the context of a new Game Plus mode, which is sensationally missing. The Callisto protocol uses a modified version of the Unreal Engine 4, capable of managing effects theoretically within the reach of only the latest version of the Epic Games graphics engine. The results of this effort are appreciated right from the start, and there is no doubt that the character models are extremely detailed, realistic, and well animated, thanks to the use of scanning technology that have reproduced in a surprisingly faithful the appearance of the actors involved in the project. On PS5 and Xbox Series X it is possible to opt for the now traditional two graphics modes, one that aims at 4 Kelvin and runs at 30 FPS, the other that uses a dynamic resolution to reach 60 FPS. In the first case, the combination of well-regulated frame pacing and the inevitable motion blur returns a sensation of fluidity that exceeds expectation, together with obviously superior image quality, but those who do not want to give up 60 frames will still be satisfied. The lighting system, the shadows and effects such as fire and fog are very well done, albeit net of some uncertainty. While the cinematic cut of many of the game sequences is supported in an effective way from unusual shots, which once again refer to Dead Space. We have already talked about enemies. While boasting a fair variety, their design does not stand out and does not terrify, a significant lack for a survival horror. The audio sector of the Callisto protocol can count on a good selection of songs and sound management on a three-dimensional basis that is able to create a convincing sound environment, even without fully expressing the potential of such a project. And that's it. I hope this review is helpful for you. But if you enjoyed this video, then leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Leave a comment down below with your thoughts. As always, until next time, take it easy.